Carol Culleton, Anastasia Cusick, Natalie Warmerdam. Those are the names of 3 Ottawa Valley women, all killed on the same day by the same man, a former intimate partner of each of the women. Recently, an inquest into their senseless and avoidable murders wrapped up, with the coroner making 86 recommendations based on the facts. Nicole Regehr joins us, Executive Director of Gillian's Place. Nicole, I imagine you were watching this inquest with a lot of sadness, but at the same time, some hope.
Yeah, for folks in our sector who were there, who were part of the inquest, a lot of my colleagues were interviewed as part of it. They said it feels different this time. These are the recommendations that came out from the inquest, which were jury recommendations, actually. They're things that we've been screaming from the rooftops for years, right? But this feels a little different this time, and they've made some really great recommendations, one of which being, a commission to ensure that, the recommendations get followed through, because, if that doesn't happen, then they're just that. They're only recommendations. And so we really want to ensure that this time, in all of our communities, that, we're going to our MPPs, we're going to our MPs, and we're ensuring that, these recommendations become a reality.
Number 1 on that list is that the province declares intimate partner violence an epidemic.
Yes.
That's kind of an inflammatory word, but it's important, is it not?
It is, and you want to be careful about calling anything an epidemic, but women are being killed because they are women in epidemic proportions. During the 3 weeks of the inquest, 3 women in Ontario lost their lives as a result of femicide, just during the inquest. 23 so far this year. It's an epidemic. Women are being murdered by their intimate partners in just outrageous numbers, and they are the most predictable and preventable of all crimes.
Can we pick apart some of the other recommendations? 86 is a lot. Mm-hmm. What are some of the ones that you feel are the most important?
You mean, so funding, of course. We need to be able to fund the agencies and the organizations that are providing support to victims of gendered violence and intimate partner violence specifically. We are partially funded through the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, but we have to fundraise nearly $1 million a year just to sustain our current operations to meet the demand that we see here, just here in Niagara. So that's a really important recommendation, is ensuring that the agencies that support victims are funded enough to be able to do it. And so, that will go a long way. The commission, I think that's really important. One of the provincial association that we're a part of, the OAITH, which is the Ontario Association of Interval and Transition Houses, their executive director said, that can be the thread, right? They're the thread that points the needle in the direction that we need to go. So, just and naming it an epidemic, naming it femicide, these are important things. The systems that we work within, it's really important for them to understand the nature of the crime, and to be able to name it is so important and goes such a long way in being able to talk about it and prevent it, right? If we're not talking about it, if it's not understood, then how are we ever going to prevent it?
One of the things that I picked out right off the top is they suggest a fund called the She Can Fund. Mm-hmm. And the can part of that standing for the 3 women, yes. Carol, Anastasia, and Natalie, who lost their lives.
Yeah, and that's important too. When women are, contemplating leaving a violent situation, there are a lot of factors, a lot of which are financial. So we have funds at Gillian's Place that we help women, support them in their transition into living independently. But again, that's something we fundraise for, right? So to be able to have something that can help women with things like, first and last month's rent, some have had their credit destroyed, so they need to pay deposits for things like utilities, legal expenses. Legal aid is something that you can only get if you're so very low income, and there's not a lot of lawyers, especially here in Niagara, that will even accept legal aid certificates. But there are so many legal kind of hoops that you need to jump through and navigate in order to be able to move past and kind of move into this living independently. So, there are a lot of expenses that come with even attempting to leave, a violent partner.
This inquest focused on 3 women in the Ottawa Valley, and the rural part of the Ottawa Valley And it really shone the light on how difficult it can be for all women, but especially women in rural areas, to get out of these situations.
Absolutely. Women in rural areas face increased barriers, transportation just to get somewhere. There are more firearms in rural communities. It's much more difficult to seek help. And just, the nature of rural communities, typically everybody kind of knows everybody. So to be able to reach out and look for help confidentially is very difficult. It's very likely that, if you were to go to, an office looking for help, your neighbor sees you and tells your partner, right? So there are definitely increased barriers for folks in rural communities to access help. For us, we serve some rural communities here in Niagara, so it's important to know that we accept collect calls. We will send a taxi. There are things that we will do to ensure a woman's safety in getting her to our shelter if that's what she needs.
We all know about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and when that ended and how slow it is to apply some of those recommendations. Are you hopeful that some of these 86 recommendations from this inquest will be much more, I guess, taken seriously much more quickly?
I think that really depends on the community's response, right? So, us in our sector as women's shelters across the province, we are going to ensure that, this is something that we continue to talk about, that we, are trying to move the needle on. But the community really has an important part to play here in how seriously and how quickly we can move these things through, right? If it's important to constituents, it's important to their local government, and we need the whole community support to be able to move this needle.
And this is a big part of Gillian's place, is the advocacy and fighting for change.
Yes, that's aside from protecting the women and ensuring their safety, the women, trans, and non-binary folks that come to us, being in the community and advocating for reform and changes to the systems that we have to work in is so important in the work that we do. We don't receive any funding for prevention. That's part of what we have to fundraise for, but we're never going to eradicate the issue until we prevent it, right? Until we start working towards that. So, absolutely, I think it's going to take an entire community to start putting these recommendations into action.
Let's hope that this inquest becomes a landmark, big change of direction case that we will always remember.
I hope so. It feels that way this time.
Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.